Washington's economy. Economy. Sum of goods, services, and jobs produced by a location, region, or country. The economy is strong when GDP increases, employment is high, and inflation is low. What is GDP, you ask? Well, I'll tell you. Gross domestic product is the market value of all officially recognized final goods and services produced within a country in a year or other given period of time. Did I tell you that GDP stands for gross domestic product? Well, now you know. The contemporary era, which is between 1980 and standing times like 2014 and so on, GDP is strong compared to other GDPs of other countries. And in 1980, three foreign events caused the economy to go into a recession. Vietnam War from 1965 into 1973, the Yom Kippur War from 1973 to 1974, and the Iranian hostage situation from 1979 to 1981. Now, what are these three events? I have them right here, and I'll tell you. The Vietnam War, longest American war, which resulted in almost 60,000 American deaths and over 2 million Vietnamese deaths. But this war was not between America and the Vietnamese. Sorry for my mishap there. I either meant Vietnam or Vietnamese.
Okay.
As in, do you want some Vietnamese sandwiches tonight? The Vietnam War was a war between not the US and Vietnam, but Vietnam and France. Now, in this war, the US aided not only with men, but over $2.6 billion of financial service. Now that puts a stain on not only Washington State's economy, but the whole United States. Oh, get myself together, guys. I just don't want to blow. Now, next. What is the Yom Kippur War of 1973 to 1974? Now, the U.S. didn't fight in this war directly, but it was sparked when Egypt and Syria led a surprise attack against Israel in the 1970s on Yom Kippur, which is the holiest day in the religion of Judaism.
You are so boring.
Now, during this war, the Arabs stopped producing oil. And as we know, we use oil for so many things. Now, this stop of the production of oil led to a high inflation in the U.S. because when there's no more oil, what do? So we charge more for the things we already have because we're not going to get more of it. Okay. So the third event, 60 American hostages were taken in 1979 by Iranian students who captured them in the U.S. Embassy. Now, they were held as hostages for over 2 years and then were released afterwards. Now, this didn't put a strain on the United States economy, but it also produced a big holdup on the economy for Iraq or Iran, whichever you want to call it. Now, continuing on, comparatively speaking, the GDP of Washington isn't the strongest compared to other states, but it is considered a state that produces a fair amount. Now, GDP was around $125 billion in Washington State as of 1980s and grew competitively to $178 billion in the 1990s. Now, at this time in the 1990s, the stock market began to grow in tech stocks and investors made fortunes, but it all turned around and lost money when the stocks started selling. And this affected the areas of Seattle, Bellevue, and Redmond. Those were the areas that were affected. Now, continuing on with the GDP of Washington State, continuing on with the GDP of Washington State, from 1990, where it stood at $178 billion, it increased to over $308 billion in 2008. However, in 2009, GDP went to around $299 billion. Now let that sink in for a moment. $299 billion is a lot of money. But it was in fact the time where there was one of the greatest recessions that America's ever seen. And Washington State was among those that were affected. In the United States, during the Great Recession, over 7 million.5 jobs were lost. And it's considered one of the greatest, saddest events since the Great Depression. Now, let's talk about this. Okay, so in 2008 and 2009, what happened was that there were banks, and they loaned out a lot of money, and the banks were on the edge of bankruptcy. So what did we do? The federal government bailed them out with our tax dollars, and they saved the banks from almost dying and going bankrupt. Also, the housing market completely died, and unemployment rates shot through the roof like God knows what. Sometimes when I think back, I don't know how I still have this job. But, we recovered from that, but we are still recovering from that great loss. And in 2013 and 2014, the housing market is increasing. The economy is also made up of tons of different industries, as well as aircraft and space. These two industries are the top industries in Washington State. With companies like Boeing and Microsoft, we do incredibly well with them, as well as companies like Amazon. Anything else? That is all with News Channel 4800. We'll see you soon.